Okay, so a lot of questions on the Facebook group and the forum are around how do I force charge my battery system? How do I force discharge? What do the other work modes mean? Uh, why are some work modes available? Why are some not? So I thought I would just create one video that walks through all of the settings so that at the end of this, hopefully you understand what all the different features, work modes are, and also how you can adapt and configure those settings to reach your goal when it comes to charging or discharging your battery. I'm just running a virtual device right now. This should look something like what you see on your mobile phone. We're going to focus on the mobile phone app. I know there's a desktop version as well, but we'll focus on the mobile phone because that's the most common interface for most Fox customers. Some of these settings are dependent on your inverter model, the hardware that is available, but also the inverter's firmware version. So it's always worth if I cover something that's not available or you don't see the same settings, it's normally down to only a couple things. Does your hardware support it? Is your firmware up to date? And is it restricted by something to do with your country settings? So certain features are only available in certain countries. I'm in the UK, so you'll see features available for the UK. If you're in a different country or geographic, you may have different settings to me. Fox are a global company. They ship one software product for all of their hardware, so some differences may be expected, and also the time of this video. So what's available today towards the end of 2025 may not be the same if you're looking at this video in the future. So with all of that preamble, let's dig straight into it. So when you're looking at what's called the plant view or the power flow view, I can see what's going on with my example site here. First thing you'll want to do is to have a look under the quick settings, which is just underneath the graphic of everything moving. We may want to just quickly cover what this is, what we're looking at. So top left, load. That is the load perceived by your inverter that your house is drawing. So that is everything, sometimes your car charger, sometimes not, but everything that's going on in your home. So at the moment, the Fox system believes that my house load is 1.2 kilowatts, that my PV is generating 1.5 kilowatts, or nearly 1.6 up in the top right hand corner. This is what my battery is doing down on the sort of middle right corner. My battery is currently discharging. I can tell that because the energy flow arrow is going up out of the battery through the inverter and it's covering either the house load, and I've got a small amount of grid export. The green line is leaving my property. I am exporting at the moment. That's what that means. Looking at this screen, we're going to click on quick settings to the lower portion. Some options are going to appear. If you've got multiple inverters, you'll have a drop down at the top. If you only have a single inverter and battery, you won't have this drop down. Grid charge settings. This is a feature that came out right with the very first Fox inverter and the very first firmware. So this is what's often referred to as the charge windows or the classic charging. This is a very simple interface. You get two slots and you can configure whether your system is going to charge within these slots or not, or whether you want to block discharging. So we'll look at this first slot. I'm going to set a cheap rate from 30 minutes past midnight. We'll do that. So drag all this down, a little bit harder when you're using a mouse, and we'll go all the way to 5:30. So for those in the UK, will recognise this as the Octopus Go range. So as it is between these two times, this inverter will now just not discharge. It's just going to sit there doing nothing because I've told it not to discharge between these two windows. And if I hit save, that looks like that. You can see the times have saved. What a lot of people miss is this extra option along the bottom for enable charge from grid. You've got to toggle that on in order to tell the inverter that it can consume grid power to charge the battery. If this is toggled off, these times effectively mean when not to discharge from the battery. So the battery system effectively will do nothing overnight. That sometimes is useful if you want to prevent discharging for whatever reason, But more commonly, you're setting these windows up because you have a cheap rate off-peak tariff, a better rate overnight. So you'll want to set the times, you'll want to enable the charge from grid, you'll want to hit save, and you can see the time, and now it says charge from grid enabled. This still won't do anything because we haven't enabled it. So we have to toggle this option here, and then we have to hit submit. If you miss, great, we've got a success message. If you miss any of those steps, so if you don't toggle this option and hit save, if you don't toggle this option and hit submit, and you can keep hitting submit just so you're really sure that you've saved it. If you don't do any of those, then the likelihood is that you won't charge your battery overnight. A lot of people get stuck on tariffs that bridge past midnight, so we'll try and do that. So if we'll do intelligent go as a tariff, which is quite common as well. So we'll do from 11:30 in the evening to 5:30 in the morning. We're going to charge from the grid, try and hit save, invalid data. See loads of posts about, well, what does this mean? This is the tariff I want to charge my window. The Fox system currently, time of recording, with this interface and this app version, doesn't allow the charge window to cross midnight. So what we have to do is we have to go back and we're going to set this first window to 12:30 to scroll all the way up. There we go. So we're getting that first half an hour charge on this window, and then you can see what we're going to do. We're going to then continue it. So we're going to go from midnight all the way to 5:30. Enable charge from grid, hit save, toggle that on, hit submit. So what we've done is we've effectively extended the charge window from 11:30 all the way through to 5:30. Of course, there is 1 minute when we're technically not within a schedule. Doesn't matter. That's just a limitation. That is what it is right now. So if you're on Octopus Intelligent Go, where you can charge a little bit earlier, an hour earlier than a standard Go customer, as an example, this is how you would configure your charging window. These are classic, or the legacy charging system, as it's often referred to. The next problem that people run into is if they're on something like an Octopus Cozy, or I think it's even Octopus Flux now, where you get 3 cheap rate windows. Questions that often get asked are, well, where do I put the third charge window? It's not possible with this classic charging system. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to use a new system that Fox have invented called the scheduler mode. So we'll first disable these force charging windows by toggling those options off. And you'll notice again, if I go to the home page and click on quick settings, you'll notice that I have this mode here called mode scheduler disabled. I'm going to click on that. And there's 2 modes. There's if you're an Octopus Agile customer, which is that dynamic rate that gives you 30-minute blocks at varying prices. This is still being heavily developed. By the time this video comes out, there may even be Flux integration, intelligent Flux integration available as well. But right now, we've got 2 options. The manual scheduler. So if we go into the manual scheduler, this is going to allow us to set, I'm just going to delete that once we start fresh. This is going to allow us to set many different blocks. So imagine we are someone like an Octopus Cozy customer, as your energy tariff that needs 3 charging blocks. We're going to start by setting the first charging block, and let's say that that's from, I don't know the times off by heart, so I'm just going to make some up. So we're going to go from 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. is the first charging block. And then we're going to set the work mode to force charge. The minimum state of charge on grid and the maximum. So we're going to leave the minimum at 10. The max state of charge I'm going to set to 100. That means we're going to tell it to force charge the battery to 100%. Some people also set the force discharge property for the state of charge. I don't, and I haven't seen any issues with it, but if you're encountering issues, It may be worth also setting this one to 100 as well. The next one that is a fairly new change is this AC power for force discharge. On newer firmware versions, this actually becomes the speed in which you're going to charge the batteries. On older versions, it doesn't do anything. So I typically will set this to the speed of the inverter or the charge speed that completes the charge in the cheap rate window. So as we're only giving this an hour, we probably want the full speed charge. So if we've got a 5 kilowatt inverter, we've got 5,000 watts worth of charge. So we're going to do 5,000. If we've got a 6 kilowatt inverter, we'll set that to 6,000, 7,000, etc. For the larger inverters. So you can match this number to the size of your inverter if you want the fastest speeds possible. There are some edge cases about the temperature of the battery, the state of charge of the battery that affect its charge speed. We're not going to go into that today. For here, we're focusing on what these settings mean, how to configure a force charge. So we've done all of that. We'll hit save. We can toggle it on to turn it on. And then I'm going to add another one as well. So maybe there's a midday charge as well on Cozy. So I'm going to go from 12 noon to 1 is my next one. We're going to do the same thing. So I want a force charge. I want to set my maximum state of charge to 100 because I want it to fill up. Might as well set this one to 100 as well. And I want the speed to be charged as fast as possible if I've got a 5 kilowatt inverter. Hit save and just rinse and repeat. So on Cozy there's one more. Is it from 4 till 5? I can't. Doesn't matter. You get the point. I can set lots of these windows. We'll go all the way back. We'll set another hour here. Force charge max 100. Set that one to 100. Like I said, only because I don't think it does anything for force charge, but the way that these values change with different firmware versions, it's not going to hurt. Again, set to 5,000 watts charge. Save. Toggle on. So make sure the times are all set. Make sure the max data charge is set to 100. It's really common for people to leave it at 10. Hit submit. Congratulations, we've now got a 3-slot charge window, which is loosely around the idea that you'd want to do for something like an an octopus flux type of setup, or an octopus cozy, something where there's more than 2 charge slots. I don't need to stop there. I could also add another one. I think I can add up to 12 now. So yeah, you can run it to the limit. There are other things we can do as well. So we can also set in the work mode, you saw there's feed-in priority, backup, and force discharge that we haven't touched, as well as self-use. Self-use is the default work mode that the inverter uses. That means that the solar covers the house load first, and then after the house load, the surplus from your generation from solar goes to the battery. And when the battery's full or the battery is being charge limited, any surplus then will go out to the grid as export. So self-use is kind of the default that most people would use. You don't actually need to set a self-use window because it's kind of assumed that anything that isn't one of these set schedules, anything that's not set, so for example at 5:01 that we've not got set, or 5:01 p.m. to 4 a.m., that will just drop to self-use automatically. So I don't often see very many people using self-use because it's not really needed, at least again on this version of the firmware. So self-use is the default. That's all great. You don't need to set any other settings for self-use at this time. Feed-in priority changes one main thing. So the solar generation still covers the house load, but instead of charging the battery with any additional surplus solar, it just sends it straight out to the grid. You may have noticed at the beginning of the video, mine was already in feed-in mode because I charge my batteries overnight and then I have an automation to flip it into feed-in mode. So all day, all of my solar generation is exported, all the surplus after my house loads. So that's quite useful if you've got a better export rate than an import rate. You want to try and export as much solar as possible. In my case, I charge at 7p and export at 15p, so I or 7.5 and 15 pence. So it's better for me to export as much solar as possible. That's what feed-in mode does. The other one that a lot of people get confused about is forced discharge. So this is telling the inverter that you want to use battery power and you want to output it from the inverter, and it will be house loads covered first, and anything not used by the house will then go to the grid and be exported. So where you see an opportunity to export during a peak time between, is it 5 and 7 p.m. on Flux, you get a preferential export rate. So with forced discharge, imagine I wanted to discharge between 6 and 7 p.m. Let me just set this to 0. I want to discharge between 6 and 7 p.m. tonight. Forced discharge. The minimum stated charge on grid doesn't matter. The maximum doesn't actually matter either. The forced discharge cutoff is when I want the forced discharge to stop. So it's quite common to maybe set this to say 20% or 30%. And that's the when it hits this number, it's going to stop forced discharging. That's useful if you want to keep a bit of battery capacity back to continue to power the house through the evening until your next cheap rate overnight. So set this or tune it to make sure that you still keep enough battery capacity charged that you can use through the evening. So between the end of your force charge and the beginning of your cheap rate window. The max AC power force discharge number, this is important. So if we left this at 0, the inverter would actually do nothing during the force discharge, and you'd end up using everything from the grid because you're telling the inverter to do nothing wattage wise. If you want to tell the inverter to output at its full speed, if it's a 5 kilowatt inverter, again, you'd set 5,000 watts here. 6,000, the 6 kilowatt inverter, 6,000. That will tell the inverter to output at full speed from the battery, assuming a few other variables are all met to do with your hardware, number of batteries, temperature, etc. What's important here is you will notice what goes to the grid is after covering your house loads. So if I have a 5 kilowatt inverter and I've set it to 5,000 watts like this, if my house is using 2 kilowatts, I'm only going to be exporting 3 to the grid. That's a lot of people get confused, but well, I've set it to force discharge at 5,000 watts. Why am I not exporting at 5,000 watts? That's because your export is after your house loads are covered. A lot of people also set this wrong. So they think, oh, well, I only want it to export to the grid, say 2 kilowatts, so 2,000 watts. If they then turn on a 1.5 kilowatt appliance, they're only going to be exporting 500 watts, so half a kilowatt, as per what we've just described before. But what people don't realize is if they then turn more and more devices on, so if they turn their oven, their kettle, their water heater on, and suddenly their house load is, say it's 5,000 watts, it's 5 kilowatts, then if this is set to 2,000, you're telling the inverter it can only output 2 kilowatts, but if the house load is 5 kilowatts, that 3 kilowatt difference will be imported from the grid. It'll be costing you money. So with forced discharge, while it does make sense to kind of try to not run the inverter really hard and the batteries really hard by maxing out the inverter capability, know that if you then increase your house load, you'll then start to import power potentially at a peak period. So you've really got to be aware of that. So I'd probably start off just like with force charging by just setting this to the inverter capacity. So if I've got a 5 kilowatt inverter, set this to 5,000. Then your inverter is doing everything it can and hitting save in the top right. Again, you need to make sure you hit save in the top right. You need to also make sure you toggle it on because anything not toggled on will not do anything. So I can hit submit to save that. We should see a success message. If I want to remove any of these slots. So maybe this middle one no longer applies to me. I want to remove it. I simply grab it and drag it to the left and then hit delete. You do then need to make sure that you hit submit. And I can go back to my inverter. What you will notice, and what catches a lot of people out again, is inverter, the mode scheduler still says it's disabled. That's old data. If we go back to the home screen, drag down, refresh the data, and then click on quick settings again, you'll get the true setting of it. So we can see that mode scheduler is enabled, and I'll be able to see these settings. There's a couple of things that also catch people out, and that's that the work mode, now you can't change the work mode. Mode scheduler is controlling the work mode, so you can't use this separate sort of legacy work mode controller. That won't work, that will give you an error. You also can't use the classic timers on the grid charge settings, so this will not work while I have the mode scheduler enabled. You'll get an error message when you try to save it. If you want to go back to, we'll try it. So, charging settings. We'll try and do a minute of grid charge. Should get an error. Unsupported function. Yeah, cool. That means that something else is going on and overriding it. So if we go to mode scheduler, I can disable it by clicking on this icon here, and then I can go back, refresh the data by dragging down, and then you can see mode scheduler is now disabled. Now I can go to grid charge settings, and I can then try and set up that grid charge that I couldn't do before. And that's now working. So that's another thing to be aware. You can, I believe, go into the mode scheduler and then you can turn this on. Yes, so you can go from classic and turn on mode scheduler, but you can't turn classics on with mode scheduler enabled. So if I now go back, refresh the data, you get used to dragging down a lot. If I try and turn this on now that if we notice mode scheduler is back enabled, if I try and turn this on, it should error, yet unsupported function again. So, and just to remind everyone to turn manual scheduler off, I click on this check mark here. If I want to edit the schedule, I can click on this little book symbol here. I drag to the left and then click delete and then submit to remove. I don't think there's anything more complicated than that. If I've missed anything out, please comment on the video, let me know what I've missed. But in terms of the most common questions, how we see people going wrong, I hope this video has helped you. Thanks.